Alright, let's keep chugging along with part 9 now. We are talking about priest spells. Let's get started right away. Priests' strength include that their hero power does affect the board, and they have efficient ways to empower the minions that they have on the board, as well as having a good amount of removal. However, the problem with the priest as well is that they're dependent on having those strong minions. So once you get a minion onto the board, it's pretty easy to keep it there. Well, it's not easy, I should say. It's priests have more mechanisms for keeping the minions there than other classes do. But the challenge is obviously getting them there and allowing them to actually stick to the board. But in the case that you're able to keep healing this like one creature that consistently keeps putting out attacks and he keeps surviving, you can get a lot of value out of just one minion. And that's because priests can keep healing thanks to its hero power. However, its board clear cards are weaker than other classes, and we'll talk about those later. Let's jump right into it. Circle of Healing, restore 4 health to all minions. This card is dependent on other cards to be good and does not justify a slot in your deck, unless you have an Auchenai Soul Priest. So you would not... This card is fantastic if you get an Auchenai Soul Priest, because all of a sudden you have a board clear card. You basically have a Hellfire, or a little bit stronger than Hellfire actually. But I would not pick up this card just without a circle of without an Auchenai Soul Priest that's already in your deck, because restoring 4 health to all minions generally isn't too great for you, especially since you already have so many other mechanisms to heal your creatures. So this card is probably a 3. Silence. This card is hard to evaluate because, like I talked about in the last video we made, silence is very difficult to evaluate on its own because silence can be worth so much or could be worth so little, depending on how you use it. Unfortunately, this card doesn't justify a slot in your deck because all it does is silence. And it guaranteed basically generates card disadvantage for you because it can't kill anything. So with that being said, silence is probably a 2 or a 3 as well. Holy Smite, 1 mana, deal 2 damage. That's above the curve in terms of damage. It's like the Arcane Shot. We talked about the Arcane Shot in the Hunter video, where having 1 of them is good, having 2 of them may be too much but still okay, having 3 or more is really bad. So Holy Smite is probably a 6, 7, maybe even an 8. Priests struggle necessarily in the early game because most of their minions or class cards have synergies that are better in the late game. So having Holy Smite can be really effective to curbing some of your opponent's early game power. Power Word Shield, give a minion +2 health, draw a card. So 1 mana draw a card in itself is good because you're paying less money, or less mana. You're paying less mana to draw a card than what drawing a card is worth, with the caveat that the card, the card's only purpose is to cycle. That's if the card was just a 1 mana draw a card. However, this card is not only 1 mana draw a card, but also 1 mana draw a card, give a minion +2 health. And giving a minion +2 health is actually really effective, even at turn 2. Say your opponent plays a 2-3, or actually, say your opponent plays a 2-3 or a 3-2, and you have a 3-2 on the board, and you use Power of Shield, and now you have a 3-4, and it can trade into both of those minions without a problem, and trades effectively, and wins, and survives, and stays on board. And you can heal it up again if necessary with your hero ability. So, that being said, Power Word Shield is fantastic. This card is, I think, a 10. I've seen multiple people pick up 3 or 4 of these without any real reservation. Inner Fire, change a minion's attack to be equal to its health. This card is dependent on other cards to be good, and it also is dependent on... you have minions in your deck that have low attack values and high health values, which is pretty hard to reliably get. So Inner Fire is below average, probably a 3 or a 4. Mind Vision, put a copy of a random card into in your opponent's hand into your hand. I would not call this 1 mana draw a card, because it isn't. It's copying your opponent's hand. And if you keep winning with your deck and eventually get into higher and higher states of the game, the likelihood that you'll get better cards, stronger cards, is higher. But there are a lot of variables in evaluating this card, and so for that reason I'm going to put it at the consistent 5. This card could be garbage, this card could be fantastic, this card could be okay. It's entirely dependent on what your opponent plays. So, yeah. Difficult to evaluate card. I'm trying to decide how I want to consider this in terms of Thoughtsteal. I guess I'll think about it subconsciously while we work our way over there. Light of the Naaru, restore 3 health if the target is still damaged. Summon a Light Warden. The Light Warden is a 1/2, 1 mana 1/2. Whenever a character is healed, gain +2 attack. And the Light Warden does not get buffed by the Light of the Naaru, which kind of stinks. But okay, so restoring 3 health is, what is that worth? It's hard to really say because no one really puts a value on restoring 3 health. So I'll probably call it 1 mana. If the target is still damaged, summon a Light Warden. Summoning a Light Warden is worth 1 mana. So if the target is still damaged, this card is good. You get to restore health, hopefully to a minion, not to your hero, but sometimes you will restore it to your hero, and you'll be able to. Think about it this way. If you have a Light Warden, which costs 1 mana, you play the Light Warden. If you have Light of the Naaru, and you just heal yourself, and you're still damaged, and you get the Light Warden, it's essentially doing the exact same thing as the Light Warden in the first place, playing the Light Warden in the first place, except you also get 3 health, like restore 3 health as well. So if you think about it that way, Light of the Naaru is a strictly better Light Warden. So I'll consider this card good. I'll say it's a 6. Mind Blast, deal 5 damage to the enemy hero. Killing your hero is not a race. It's not a 30-0 race. You need to establish board control in order to hit the face. And getting your opponent down to 5 HP, you're likely already in an advantageous position to win the game in the first place. So Mind Blast is pretty irrelevant. I'll give it a 2 or a 3. It doesn't affect the board, and that's the problem. Shadow Word Pain, destroy a minion with 3 or less attack. This card is not as good as Shadow Word Death in my opinion because you can the value of a minion that costs 3 or less that has 3 or less attack is not as high as a minion that has 5 or more attack. So Shadow Word Pain, it's solid removal. It's still good. It allows priests to destroy something that could be a pain to destroy otherwise, like a shielded mini bot, the 2/2 Divine Shield Paladin class card. Something like that can be a real pain in the butt for priests to try to handle. As well as there's also some benefits of priests being weak in the early game and Shadow Word Pain being able to negate and remove early game threats. And in the case that Shadow Word Pain destroys anything higher cost than 2 mana, technically you're getting value. So if you killed the Spider Tank, if you killed the Iron Fur Grizzly maybe, those cards, when they're destroyed by the Shadow Word Pain, you get value. You spent 1 less mana than your opponent did. Divine Spirit, double a minion's health. In this you have to reliably get minions that have a lot of health. And even then, this card's pretty weak against silence or other necessary things, especially if your minion has low attack already. Like having a 2/14 on board, your opponent is just going to ignore clearing it and just keep going for your other minions instead of actually worrying about it. So when you think about it that way, Divine Spirit, it can be very useful, but I don't think it's useful enough all the time, and it's completely dependent on other cards once again to be good, and cards that are dependent on other cards aren't very good. So I'll give it, I think it's better than Inner Fire, even though people think of the Divine Spirit Inner Fire as a combo. I don't consider it a combo because I don't think of combos in Arena that often, at least, and so I'll consider this card, I think it's better than Inner Fire, but I still think it's bad. I'll give it a 4. Resurrect, summon a random friendly minion that died this game. That is very difficult to evaluate, but think about it this way. If you resurrect something that costs more than 2 mana, this card was good. Very good. In the case that it gets a 2 mana card back, it's still okay. If it gets a 1 mana card back, then you lose your value. But the more you think about it, in the sense that any card that is resurrected that costs more than 2 mana, like has good stats, I should say, has stats that are worth more than 2 mana, you get value out of the card. Obviously, the battle cry effect doesn't come into play, but the death rattle does. So if your card has a strong death rattle, which is unlikely but possible, then it's still very good. Shadow Word. Oh, I should give a Resurrect a rating. Resurrect is probably a 7. I'll say, maybe a 6. I'll give it a 6 because of the unlikely effect. The fact that you can't guarantee value out of it. You can come pretty close to getting at least solid value out of it, but you can't guarantee value out of it. So for that reason, 6. Shadow Word Death. Destroy a minion with attack of 5 or more. This is your hard removal card. Oh, excuse me. This is kind of like Hex, in the sense that destroying a minion with attack of 5 or more is really hard removal that can deal with high cost minions that your opponent will play very easily and very efficiently. It only costs 3 mana, and the only 3 mana card that I think it has any like application to is Magma Rager, but you're never going to use Shadow Word Death on a Magma Rager. So anything more than that, anything that has 5 attack, you're going to get value out of it in terms of, I spent less mana than you did, kind of like Shadow Word Pain. And so for that reason, I think that Shadow Word Death is a very good card that's very justifiable in picking up a lot of the time. The problem with Shadow Word Death, obviously, is if your opponent doesn't play anything with 5 or more attack, it's kind of a dead card. It's late game removal. It's exclusively late game removal, which is where priests excel, mainly because of this card and because of mind control and the like. So I think Shadow Word Death is good. I'll give it an 8. Thoughtsteal. Thoughtsteal, we talked about this with Sense Demons. We're talking about this with Arcane Intellect. We'll talk about this with Thoughtsteal. This is 3 mana, draw 2 cards, which is average and fine, but does not do anything for the 3 mana. And as a result, you are losing an opportunity to potentially gain control of the board or push an advantage or be able to do anything with the board. And there'll be times where you don't have anything else to do and you end up using Thoughtsteal and at least something happens. And that's alright, but Thoughtsteal is going to be, just like I evaluated, or will evaluate, Arcane Intellect, a 5. You can't guarantee value because you're just drawing 2 cards. Or you're not even drawing 2 cards, but you're drawing 2 cards. One benefit about this card is that it generates slight card advantage by giving you a second card. You gain 2 cards and you lose 1 by using the Thoughtsteal, so for that reason you're gaining some card advantage, which could be an advantage of the card, but I don't think enough to justify putting it over a rating of a 5. Velen's Chosen. Give a minion +2, +4, and spell damage +1. The spell damage +1 can be really useful, but it's unlikely to pull off. More importantly is give a minion +2, +4 worth 3 mana, and in my opinion, absolutely yes. Playing a minion that has +2, like a 3 mana 2/4 in terms of stats is okay, but in terms of buff cards, giving +2, +4 to a minion that already has a set attack value and health value means that a card is going to be very, very sticky and going to be able to stay on the board for a while and hopefully get multiple trades in and multiple value attacks in, and then as well as being able to constantly heal it because you're a priest. This card I think is top tier. In fact, one of my 12, the time I got 12 wins on Priest was a deck that had double Velen's Chosen and double Lightbomb, and we'll talk about Lightbomb later. Honestly, I got super lucky with that deck. It was very strong. Alright, Shadowform. Your hero power becomes deal 2 damage. If already in Shadowform, 3 damage. Never pick up 2 of these cards, because that's terrible. But, the best way I can say this card is very slow. Because you have to constantly be using your hero power to get value out of it, and it's simply the opposite of what a priest normally does. So, in a sense, all of your healing synergies that you may have, like with your Northshire cleric and whatever, you throw all of those out the window, which is okay in Arena because you probably don't have a lot of them in the first place. So that's fine. And dealing 2 damage consistently is actually really strong. Think about the Hunter hero ability, where when you have your Steam Weedle Sniper and your hero power can affect the board, everyone kind of rants and raves about how strong the Hunter hero ability is when it can actually target a minion. Well, Shadowform gives you that opportunity permanently to change to that Hunter level at all times, which is okay. This card is average because there will be times where you really want to heal your creatures and you can't do that anymore, but there are also times that dealing 2 damage is really strong. So the fact that you play 3 mana and do nothing is a downside. That's why the card is slow. But if you can start constantly using hero powers to be effective, then Shadowform is really good. So Shadowform is 4 or a 5. Mass Dispel. Silence all enemy minions, draw a card. So, is silencing all of your opponent's creatures for 2.5 mana worth it? No. I'll be brief there. Silence costs, the spell Silence, we already talked about as not being worth a card, is 0 mana. And this is draw a card, and then silence everything that your opponent has. What's the likelihood that your opponent's going to have like 3 or 4 things that you need to silence to win the game? Almost 0. There's almost no likelihood of that happening. And I think about it in the sense that if your opponent already has 4 or 5 things on the board that need to be silenced, you're probably already losing really hard anyway. And Mass Dispel, likely it'll only take away taunts, it'll take away divine shields, and I don't think it'll take away enough to justify paying 4 mana for the card. So I don't think this card does enough for its cost, and for that reason I give this card a 2. Funny to note though that Mass Dispel has been insanely useful in the solo adventures, the Curse of Naxxramas and the Blackrock Mountain. Just based on the fact that they have so many unique things and so many things that need to be silenced because of how ridiculous their effects are. So for that reason, I would say that Mass Dispel it's good to have. Like, I wouldn't just disenchant Mass Dispel in like Constructed because of the solo adventures, but regardless, that's not Arena. Let's stay on task here. Holy Nova. Deal 2 damage to all enemies, restore 2 health to all friendly characters. It's actually really difficult to make Holy Nova both heal your creatures and destroy the enemy creatures reliably in a way that gives you value in both senses. And so, in my head, because it costs 1 more mana, this is a strictly worse consecration. And I say strictly worse consecration. The reality is it's not a strictly worse consecration. It's a consecration that costs 1 more mana that also can restore health to all friendly characters. And that can be huge. That can be really big and very beneficial. But it's kind of hard to do that. In 5 mana, deal 2 damage to everything is kind of weak. Compared to like Hellfire or Demon Wrath, Demon Flame? No, Demon Wrath. Which is the demon board clear card that deals 2 damage to everything. But Holy Nova, it's still a board clear card. All board clear cards have some sort of aspect of being good because they're comeback mechanisms, and comeback mechanisms are what help you stay in the game. That's what makes Arena feasible when you get behind a little bit. It's not like you're going to win every game at turn 2. It's these cards that allow you to get back into the game or push that advantage even more. That's what makes Arena fun, honestly. It makes every game possible to win. So with that being said, Holy Nova is still a good card. I'll give it a 7 or an 8. It's not insane. It's not disgustingly good, but it's board clear, so it's good. Holy Fire, deal 5 damage, restore 5 health to your hero. The restoring 5 health to your hero is kind of irrelevant because it's about board control. Excuse me. It's not about the restoring 5 health. And 6 mana for 5 damage is considerably below average. So, I'll give this card a 4. Having a spell that deals 5 damage, and I've talked about this before, it's still kind of good in the sense that you're dealing a large chunk of damage with only one spell. But it's still not fantastic. Obviously, for 6 mana, you want much more damage to be dealt. Alright, I think this is the last. It's got to be the last side. Lightbomb. Deal damage to each minion equal to its attack. This is another board clear card. And one thing I actually found about, at least when I played Lightbomb a lot in my decks, is that priests kind of do better with 2/3s than they do with 3/2s, and a whole bunch of minions that have higher attack values. So I felt like Lightbomb actually wasn't as negative in terms of like deal damage to everything. I found it was pretty easy to consistently get your minions to survive the Lightbomb while your opponent's minions to die to the Lightbomb. And maybe this is some bit of just bias in the sense that I've just been fortunate in the way I've played with my both constructed deck. I run a custom like priest deck that has a Lightbomb in it, and it's interesting. And the 12-win arena I got with double Lightbomb. I felt like both of those were. I felt like Lightbomb was a key card in that victory. And so for that reason, I think that Lightbomb is actually a really good card. This could be mostly a personal thing because it's very hard to evaluate a card that's deal its attack damage to itself. Which is, it's hard to evaluate because there's so many different variables involved, but I feel like it can reliably be used to clear a board effectively. And I think you can also play around it with your own healing abilities to make sure that your own creatures don't really die to the Lightbomb. So I'm going to give this card a 7. Mind Control, last but not least. Take control of a enemy minion. You get to choose the minion, which is good. It costs 10 mana, so this is your entire turn on turn 10. So you want to be sure that you are gaining a very large tempo swing by taking control of a minion. This is a include one of. You never want to include more than one mind control, in my opinion, because they're really clunky. They take up, like, you can't use them necessarily on turn 10 a lot. You have to wait for your opponent to develop his late game, develop his really powerful whatever, his really powerful stuff, and then you take control of it, and then you start to use it against him. And you already have a lot of mechanisms for stalling to the late game, or just getting rid of the stuff in the first place. So you have your Shadow Word Deaths, you have your Light Bombs. That can also control the things that Mind Control may want to seize. So Mind Control is kind of like your, in my opinion, your last line of defense. And it's a really strong last line of defense, don't get me wrong. But can you reliably... no, I don't want to say it that way. I want to say... you need to be certain that it's worth spending your entire turn and nothing else on it. And for that reason, it's clunky in your hand, but it's still very powerful. I'd say it's a 7. Because of the fact that if you draw it in the early game, you obviously can't use it at all for a lot of turns. But that's just how the game works. And... I don't know. I really like playing Priest. That's why I kind of held it off to the end. I held off this video towards the end because I felt like I was a little biased in how much I like Priest. Priest isn't necessarily considered one of the strongest classes, but it is what it is. Alright, so we talked about all the Priest spells, and we did it faster than most of the other videos, actually. Felt like I was kind of going somewhat quickly, and I still feel like we talked about everything that I wanted to talk about. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay tuned for some more, and good luck in Arena. I will see you later.